putting on my earpieces saying, you call her Highness, Your Highness, Your Royal Highness, be gracious, don't, and I go, yeah, okay, and keep her safe, and I'm going, okay. So I protected her for a period of almost a week. But the most exciting was after the first day where she'd gone all over the city and had been going to Walter Reed to visit folks, men and women coming back from Vietnam. At the end of the day at 4 o'clock, the agent came to me and he said, this is where you had to be fluid, very fluid. He said, the Queen likes you and they would like to use you at the state dinner. Do you have anything to wear? Of course I have something to wear. I wouldn't give up that opportunity. All I had was my pledge formal from 2 years prior. You remember one of those tight dresses where you zip it up the back right here and it kind of nips you? I don't have anything like that anymore. You know that kind where you had someone zip you up? That's all I had. Jump in my 1959 Volkswagen. They said, be back to the White House in 2 hours. Okay, so I jump in my Volkswagen, race back. I'm living with 4 other young women in a Georgetown townhouse in Washington. I come bursting through the door and I said, help, I have to be back at the White House in 2 hours, dressed for a White House formal dinner. So everybody pitched in and they zipped up my pledge formal and it fit, thank you God. And then someone came running over. Pat, one of the roommates, said, here, use my wiglet. Do you know what a wiglet is? Who knows what a wiglet is? Okay, a wiglet was a little hair piece, and you put it right here, and you tape it, and if you have your hair up like this, then you have this little bit of poof. It's kind of like shoulder pads for your hair. So I borrow her wiglet, we put it in my hair, and everything's ready, and I have my pledge formal, and they all wanted to see the White House. So the 3 roommates jump in my old Volkswagen, and we jump in, and we're driving to the White House, and my roommate, who was far more fashionista than I, said, you're not going to carry that purse. And I had this big utility-looking purse, you know, that had a gun, a badge, a commission book, 6 extra rounds of ammunition, and my American Express card. Now, don't let me forget about that. And I said, well, what would you suggest? She said, I don't know. You just can't carry that purse with a formal gown. So off we go to Garfinkel's. It was essentially the Neiman's of Washington. I burst through the door. I'm in my pledge formal, my wiglet. I'm looking very fine, except I have this inappropriate purse. I race into the purse department, and this woman, you know her. She works at Neiman's, too. She's rather robust. Big bosoms and a black dress with black stockings and black sensible shoes and pearls, and as she breathes, the pearls go in and out. And she calls you darling. Darling, may I help you? Or Missy or something. And I said yes, and I take out my badge and I say, I'm a Secret Service agent, I need a bag for my gun. And the pearls start going like this. And then a red, white, and blue haze passed across her eyes. She carried me, not carried me, but took me to the purse department. We picked up every black Potoswell bag known to man. She carried them on her rather big chest, and away we went, and she held the door, you know, the curtains, while I sat there trying all my equipment, just kind of like in Line of Fire, you know, when she took off all the equipment. Well, I'm trying to get it in this purse. Find one. A black little silk bag, very heavy, weighed about 18 pounds, and my fingers got tight or brown or white by the end of the day. So off we went, and I used my American Express card to pay for my stuff. Keep in mind that in 1971, women couldn't get a credit card unless your husband or your father or your brother co-signed. They wouldn't even give us credit. Can you believe that? So when they gave me my gun, my .357 Magnum and my Uzi submachine gun, and issued an American Express card, I was like Mary Tyler Moore, throwing my hat. I had credit. And in the days of women's liberation and the women's movement, that was singularly one of the most important things that had ever happened to me. And I still have that card that says 71. And in fact, every time I call in and use the card, they go, why, Mrs. Childers, you've been a member since 1971. So, and that came in factor again when I went into publishing, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. Anyway, so that was the fun thing about that. I got the purse, away we went to the White House, they scooted me in, and there I stood next to the Queen. as the president and the queen and the king, they come down the stairs, you know, like in all the movies. And she turned to me and she said, "You look very nice, good turnaround." So the next morning we left by helicopter for the West Coast. We flew on 2600, which was the tail number. By the way, when they always talk about the airplane that the president rides on, 2600 at that time was the tail number of Air Force One. Whatever, even if it's a Beechcraft Bonanza, if the president rides on it, its call sign is Air Force One. But they flew us out to them and me with them, I have to be careful about. Flew us to California. We flew through the Grand Canyon to give them what it looked like at sunset, just a few things you can do when you're Air Force One. Ended up back in Dallas and in Houston. And in Houston, she said, "Miss Clark, I'd really like to go to Neiman Marcus." And so I talked to the State Department people. They said she'd like to go to Neiman Marcus. That was fine. So we went shopping at Neiman's, and she was looking at various kinds of things. And she said, "I'd like to know where the costume jewelry is." And I thought, the Queen of Spain is going to look at costume jewelry. And she looked at me and she said, "No one would ever think a queen would wear a fake." And it turned out that all the jewels that she wore at the state dinner belonged to the state. They weren't hers. So she actually had quite a nice collection of that kind of jewelry. So off we went, back on the airplane, and we went to the launching of Apollo 14, the space shuttle. And at home, my parents watched two things: the Miss America pageant, well, Lawrence Welk, make it three, and the blast-offs. So Mother's in this little town in Pleasant Grove, Utah, watching the blast-off, and Walter Cronkite is saying, "Here we see the Queen of Spain and Spiro Agnew, the Vice President, and the King of Spain." And he said, "There's an unidentified woman. We're not sure who this woman is." And my mother is at home going, "Daddy, Kathy's on TV, and she's carrying a gun. No one will ever marry her." She did not care. She had no dream of whether or not this was earth-shaking or glass ceiling breaking. She just wanted me to have a husband. So she called my sister and said, Anna, who had married a doctor like a good daughter, and was living in Corpus Christi, married to Kurt Reamstein, a radiologist. And she said, "Anna, you've got to find her a husband. She's going to be an old maid. She's just going to spend her whole life carrying a gun going all over the country." And she found Cecil. Cecil was a psychiatrist. God knows if he'd been a neurosurgeon, we wouldn't still be giving speeches. But he was a psychiatrist with 3 darling sons. And I dated him for a couple of years, and it was really fun. And then one day I was training down in the training area, and we were shooting Uzis, and this call comes from the tower. "Make your weapons safe. Agent Clark has an emergency phone call from Texas." So all these guys, it's all men, put their weapons safe, and they hold them up in the air, and their elbows are in the cement, and they're not happy. And I climbed to the top of the tower, and I thought maybe my mother was ill or something bad had happened. "Agent Clark." And it's Cecil's nurse. And she goes, "Kathryn, it's Jerry Heitkamp. Dr. Childers wants to talk to you." Here I am in the middle of Uzi training. And he gets on the phone and he goes, he always called me Kate, and he said, Kate, I've got the ring. Will you marry me?" That was my proposal. And I went back down the tower, and I'm down there, and I'm jamming a cleat, clip, not a cleat, shooting, and the agent next to me said, "So is your mother okay?" And he said, I said, "Yes, she's fine." He said, "Well, what's the problem?" I said, "Well, this fellow I've been dating just asked me to marry him." And he said, "Now?" "Here?" And he said, "What'd you say?" And I said, "I told him it wasn't a great time." And I said, "I'm a little scared." And that scared word came up again. He said, "Kathryn, we're all scared. Marriage is a scary thing." Well, I married him. I moved to Corpus Christi, and the rest is kind of history, and I think we're out of time. Do you have 10 more minutes, or do you all want to leave?
I have 10.
Do you all want to hear 10 more minutes worth? Yeah. Wrap it up. I moved to Corpus Christi. In fact, the Yacht Club really was my first job because I inherited 3 stepsons and I didn't know what to do with them. Here I was, a former federal agent. I had to give up my gun, my badge, my commission book. I kept my American Express card. The only thing I was qualified to do was to be sheriff, and Cecil wasn't real thrilled with that. But I kind of was a fashion person. I thought, I could have a big white horse and I could have chaps, and instead I became a clown named Sassy the Sheriff. But the bottom line was I didn't have any idea how to reinvent myself. And one of the secrets, and you've heard a couple of them, that, never do anything for well, that's this one. But several of the secrets is, it's in the details. It's not being afraid. It's to do it scared. And one of them is to reinvent yourself. I'm 64 years old and I am still reinventing myself. And when I moved to Corpus Christi, I really had to reinvent myself. So my first job was I was director of Yacht Club Day Camp. And I made, as director, all these little boys that I inherited became counselors and junior counselors, so it kept them busy. You never do anything for one reason. Plus, it was a great program. Then I got involved in public service, as Jacqueline Kennedy had taught me to do, and I became involved in the Bayfest project, and that helped really launch me in the city because Susan Kennedy and I were co-chairman of Bayfest. The first big community event in 1976 to really, it was called a Community Bicentennial Festival, and it was arts, and I was director of the Arts Council. I had a minor in, when I was going through the backpack, I had a minor in arts and education, so I knew a little bit about art, and I knew a little bit about planning because I'd been president of Panhellenic in college. So I'd done a lot of events, and I was telling Rosser, I said, you just don't realize when you make a one sheet about your life, you put, where you went to school and who you married and how many kids you have. You don't keep looking for these things. Well, it turns out that Bayfest experience and I ran for city council and lost, best thing that ever happened, but people got to know me a bit. And the news director at Channel 3 called me and he said, would you be afraid, there's that word again, to host a live morning talk show? He said, a lot of people are scared of TV. And I found that to be true, that being on live television really frightens people. And I said, scared? No. I said, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not scared of much. So they hired me to be the morning talk show host on a little crazy morning show from 9 to 9:30 called Morning Magazine. Well, they didn't realize that I loved to be underestimated. And I thought, now this is fun. 30 minutes of time they don't care about. They don't have any, as long as we fill the 9 to 9:30, we can help the community, we can do great things, we can start projects, we can raise money, we can let people tell their story. This is cool. And 18 years later, I quit. But it was so much fun, and there were so many things, all because of other things that I had learned to do along the line, and the fact that my Secret Service training certainly didn't make me uncomfortable about talking with so-called celebrities or important people or regular old people who were scared to death. If they couldn't tell the story, as in many of you who were on the show, I can assure you I would just tell it for them. So it all worked out. Everybody asked me who my favorite celebrity was in those years on Channel 3, because I also figured out by running for marketing director of small markets in the country, I could get ABC's attention, and they sent me for 8 years to California to interview the stars of the new fall season on ABC. Well, I'll tell you what, I interviewed probably 25, 30, maybe 100, I don't know, different celebrities, but my favorite was Robert Wagner. He was so good looking, and luckily we have a Robert Wagner look-alike here. Come here, Jim. You need to help me on this one. My best question, that's always a good question too, is my best question whenever I talk to people, and I use this with Rosser when I help kids trying to know more about them, is what's one thing no one would believe about you? It's a great question. I use this time and time on the air because it gives people a little time to be braggadocious. They can say things that they would never say before. They can kind of, well, tell their story without feeling uncomfortable about doing it, but I'm not going to make you do that. No, you can no, you're not through. But when I interviewed Robert Wagner, he had these dreamy blue eyes, just like Jim here, and he looked at me, he'd already been interviewed by a lot of people, and I was trying to come up with a really good question, and I said, Now I'm going to whisper you the answer and you have to tell it back.
Okay.
That's all you have to do. I said, Mr. Wagner, if you could choose of all the characters you've played, Heart to Heart, I always fashioned that I looked a bit like Stephanie Powell. He was getting ready for a new show called Lime Street. Of all these shows and all these, who would you choose, which character, to marry your oldest daughter? And he looked at me and he said, oh, Kathryn, what a great question. Deep in my eyes now.
Oh, Kathryn, what a great question.
You could say it one more time so they can all hear it.
Oh, Kathryn, what a great question.
Yes! Well, I went back to Channel 3, and I got all that stuff about the, who would you have done, and I just got that little part that said, oh, Kathryn, what a great question, and I edited it back to back to back to back. So when I can't sleep, I have Robert Wagner going, oh, Kathryn, oh, Kathryn, oh, Thank you, you're a good sport. And that was really fun. And then one of my miracles, and I'm just going to end it with this, is when a miracle falls in your lap, do something with it. Christmas Eve 2004, my son Clark was home. He had decided to be a writer and moved to California. And we were at the Church of the Good Shepherd, and it was snowing on Christmas Eve. And he looked at me and he said, Mom, you should do a book about this. And I said, Clark, I'm not in publishing, I'm television. I write in 30-second segments. And he said, you could do this. And we kind of challenge each other back and forth. So remember that American Express card that I got back in 1971? I got it out of the backpack. I put almost $500,000 in printing costs on that book. Everyone had told me you can't do it. I went to American Bank. I went to Krista Spahn. I went to individuals and I said, help me here. I want to do 3 things with it. I want to raise money to save trees in Aransas because they were cutting the trees in Aransas County, and I was trying to raise money for that, and I was sick of silent auctions. And I said, this book, if we could do this, will be in the memory box of every family in the city for the rest of their lives. It's too good. I had a nose for news. I knew that people would genuinely say this was a miracle, that this was something that had never happened before. So everybody said, no, I couldn't get anybody, and I think Cecil was the frightened one when I put all that money on the American Express card. However, we got Miles. Well, when it was all said and done in 2005, we published 2 of these books. The first one is out of print and is currently on Amazon for $185 if you want one. There are a few left, and I've given away thousands of them to the homeless dinners or the special needs folks. I've given away thousands of the children's books. Actually, the children's book happened, and some of you may have not seen the children's storybook. I called Clark, I said, okay, you smarty pants, I've done 2 books, you write me a children's book. So he wrote the children's book, and then we didn't have an illustrator. And it's hard, and these were turnarounds of 6 months. Normally it takes years to do a project like this. I also decided that I wanted to do it all in Corpus Christi. I had done a campaign called Buy South Texas First, and everybody told me if you're going to publish, you got to go to China, you got to go to Japan, you got to go to Canada. I went, we're going to do this in the neighborhood. And I had a neighborhood project where I hired Jay Sanchez to work with me, and he videoed